and really develop a plan. You can't control it utterly, but you can help.
So I just want to compliment everybody. The question cards, we actually had a concern that we wouldn't get enough questions from the audience. It's like, so without being specific, we're going to try to figure out a way to get some answers. Now, the problem is, and maybe we'll just have to publish it because most of the cards don't have anybody's name or information on it, but we'll try to creatively figure out a way because the questions are fabulous. And what it also points out, I'm getting to see all the cards, is where the critical questions are. 10 people asking the same question 10 different ways tells you there's a real need to know. So bear with us, we'll try to figure out some way to address them, but also in our open forum at our last track this afternoon, I'll try to knock off some of those and then do what we can. But if there's any way we can give some thought to the answers to the questions after this event, we'll give that some thought. But keep them coming. And at this time, we're going to shift gears and I'm going to ask Dan to basically lead off with a couple of comments about a critical area. And I hope you're beginning to see just how organic. These things don't stand alone. In your lifespan plan, there's a lot of component parts, just like an engine. They all have to come together in one unit to drive your car down the road. But you do sometimes have to work on parts of the engine to keep it going. And so all of this is really an organic set of disciplines, basically well managed by professionals as are represented here. And Dan focuses on the in a special needs group. I've never heard of that existing within Merrill Lynch, and basically focuses on financial planning and wealth management. They're related, but they're two very different animals. There's one thing about developing a financial plan, but there's also the wealth management of those resources. And then we're going to touch back on the subject that you guys brought up around fiduciaries, because Dan deals every day with families that have other parties involved with legacy trusts that were left behind for the assets working on the benefit of a special needs child. So Dan, give us a kind of an overview of the area and some of the critical concerns that this group needs to know.
Absolutely, thank you. I think Larry said it earlier on, this is a process, right? So when you put together a financial plan, you want to make sure that it's a living, breathing document and you go back to it often. You know, someone in this audience asked a question, how often should I look at my trust? You know, you should also look at your financial plan very often as well, because as your child ages, certain things happen. You know, first you're in the regional center area, then you go to the school, then you turn 18, right, and things change, and you may look into getting a conservatorship or whatever else you might be doing. So with regard to the financial plan, it's a person-centered plan, and you really have to save for 2 lifetimes, right? Your own lifetime and the lifetime of your child. And, you know, regional center might be here in 20 years, they might not be here in 20 years. We don't know what those other resources are. So when we put together a plan, we always want to assume worst case scenario and put those numbers together. And when you're putting those numbers together, we tend to run a probability analysis for you just to see how possible it is for you to live your life, and then also may have to pay for the life of your child.
You used the term person-centered plan. It's another one of those terms that sounds kind of like a generic description of something, and it is, but is also manifested in federal law that basically is attached to the services, and this is really the area that Jim lives every day, the services that our adult children receive if they fly under what's called an HCBS waiver, which is essentially Medicaid money flowing through the states. And they require, and this is fairly new legislation, that a individual program plan, that's another acronym called an IPP, that kind of replaces, remember when our kids were in school, you had an IEP, individual educational plan? So when they become adults and acquire services, they have an IPP. But the law now says that IPP, which designates services and what the child or adult child requires, has to have been developed under this umbrella called a person-centered plan. So maybe just comment a little bit how you honor the fact that families come to you in the context that they're doing it within the person-centered plan guidelines.
Yeah, and so everybody's situation is completely different, right? Your life situation, your family, your child, the disability you might have. So you want to be able to customize something that is appropriate for each and every individual. And so the days of the financial plan from your advisor, one size fits all, just doesn't work in this situation. So you want to make sure that when Mike is putting the trust together and maybe Mercy's putting together the conservatorship and Jim is helping out with all the government benefits, that you know all the different moving parts, because we have 4 panelists up here. You could add 6 more easily. And we all have a focus in our individual silos, but I think the big part of it is working together as a team and collaborating together. So if I have an issue, that I can reach up, call someone and say, hey, here's the issue we're seeing. You guys seeing this as well? So when it comes to the person, we want to make sure that everything is identified for them and they're part of the process as well. Because we don't want to just put together a plan that's boilerplate and you give it to somebody and then it's over. That's when life really starts. Then you start adjusting, making, different changes here and there to make sure it's working for the individual.
At the core of that is this word called choice, and where the Medicare, Medicaid, CMS services are going is that they want to make sure that the individuals that are in our charge basically are expressing their choices in all various aspects of their life. And hence the person-centeredness is that that adult child is at the center of the plan. And that we, conservators or guardians or family advisory team members or whatever, basically are doing everything we can to honor the person at the center of the plan, that they have a chance to express their choice. So again, this is not just some soft concept. This is actually something that is auditable for each IPP plan, for each individual that we're in care of. And right now in the state of California, they're basically in their mind thinking this might be an annual audit to evaluate that choice making in this person-centered plan is actually happening. And if they feel it isn't, then there's going to be an intervention to correct that. So again, these terms actually have great range of impact on how we do our lifespan planning. So, Dan, one of the questions is in the area of financial planning is, what does it cost to raise and maintain a special needs adult in this environment?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer because the range is all over the place. But I remember about a decade ago, the Wall Street Journal had an article, something like the $1 million child. So if you have a child, typical child, it's $1 million. And then people started looking into what if you have a special needs child? And I've heard numbers thrown around there around $3.5 million and even more. So the numbers are staggering, and there's resources, the regional center and other insurance and other places that can help fray some of those costs. But as you're the advocate for your child. You're the one that has to pay a lot of the things that if you're not getting the services you want, you have to pay for it. So in terms of creating it, I hate the answer, it depends, but it all depends on the choices that you're making with your child, the choices of, where you're going to be doing your daycare or where you might be living, later on in life. All of those places have a different, big, long range of choices and costs to them.
So as I look out at the audience and also look at myself in the mirror with my white hair, I'm in my retirement years. This is what I do with my retirement. But many of you in this room are at or in a retirement phase, so most of your life you were planning on how to put together enough resources to carry you through a really comfortable retirement that you could enjoy for remaining years. Oh, by the way, you have a special needs child, and like my son Peter, who will live probably another 70-odd years. So not only did my wife and I have to think about our retirement nest egg and how to manage that and preserve it, because most of the models are 30-year models, and they say at the end of 30 years you ought to have at least the same amount of money that you put in, and meanwhile you're enjoying the benefits of your assets. Oh, then you get a Peter in your life who's going to live another 70 years. There's no model easily put together on how to fund his rest of his life, because he's essentially like a retiree. He will never earn any money other than Social Security. He cannot work. So now we have to bolt on this other 70 years of planning. How do you deal with the fact that you want to make sure you have enough for your retirement while providing for their, I call it retirement?
Right, and that's where you get into the financial planning aspect of it, right? So you want to first look at your situation. You know, you give the analogy, you get on a plane, what do you hear? You know, if anything happens, put the life mask on you first and then your child, right? So the same thing when it comes to financial planning. You want to make sure that you're solvent and that you're able to live your years in a way that makes you feel comfortable with your lifestyle. But then in addition to that, you got to kind of play some different inputs and figure out different stages of when my life might end, how much is there going to be? And then you take that money, and whether you're using insurance or other assets to fund it, then you see how long that money is going to last for your child. And like you said, 70 years is a very long time. So you have to be diligent about it and working with your advisor. It's going to take a lot of time for them to run these numbers. You have to be patient, but you also have to adapt it when things change. So the thing that we tend to use most often is we use the probability analysis, and it gives you a decision framework, right? So it says, you know, choice A, B, or C. Am I going to have enough money if it's, you know, $2 million or if it's $3 million? What's the right amount? And we can figure those numbers out for you, but it's done on a case-by-case basis, individual.
There's an individual in this room who I know is working with a family. I think the widowed mom is like 84 years old and has 3 siblings, one of which is special needs in their mid-50s, and her other children are normal, and she's trying to do the right thing for all of the siblings in terms of leaving her parts of her estate fairly. But then the question comes, they're not all sort of equal in terms of their needs. The non-special needs children, you know, they deserve a share of mom's estate, but she's struggling with trying to figure out how much to allocate to the special needs man and the housing question, and she's 84 years old. And so there's this kind of question. It isn't just the one individual. In this case, I'll say my son Peter. There's perhaps other siblings that are saying, you know, hello, I have a college need. You know, maybe you helped all of my brothers and sisters get a house. What about me? These are real world questions that means there's no one size fits all to do this. You really have to work very specifically with your family circumstances, siblings, family members. So any comment on that aspect and how you kind of fairly allocate?
Yeah. You know, this idea of a child deserving a share of the estate, boy, that's a great one. Yeah, the first thing I would say to a person in that situation is, you know, you don't have to leave anything to anybody. You decide. You have to decide what's important. You have to kind of have maybe a values analysis that you do. You have one child who's in greatest need, and it's perfectly all right. You know, I would give you permission to leave 40, 50, 80% of the estate to that child. Maybe when that child passes, it goes to the other kids. So it isn't like you're going to ignore them, but I, respectfully suggest this is not a time when you think about this automatic concept that some people still have, that every kid should get it. It should be divided in equal shares. And how do you do that? That's like from England. I mean, that isn't something you need to do. And the second thing I have to say is, when all of us do these kinds of analyses and we think about the future and how much money do you need, we cannot assume that all of the government programs that are providing benefits and support, that they're going to be there. You can't assume they're going to be solvent. It depends on what year you pick for when Medicare or Social Security goes insolvent. And some people will deny that. I mean, I'm neutral. I don't have a political side. It's inevitable. So things are going to shrink. The need and the demand. I think that the number of disabled people who qualify for government benefits for being disabled between 2003 and 2013 went up 29%. I mean, huge numbers. It's unsustainable. I mean, thus the role of private money managed well, special needs trusts, and so forth. So you can't factor in as a conclusion that all these programs are going to be there, they're going to grow, and they're going to be there for 50, 60, 80 years.
Let me kind of just put a statistic on what Mike just talked about. In the United States, there's over 5 million of our family members that we're talking about today. That's 1.5% of the US population, growing, compounding about 10% a year. In California, those registered with the regional center, the Department of Developmental Services, there's 303,000 Peters in the world, in California. And California is still providing services. You go to the state of Texas, which is a pretty large state, they have 79,000 people on the waiting list to be able to get any services out of the equivalent of our DDS. California, at the moment, does not have waiting lists, but we're heading in that direction. Just one other comment about the siblings, and I'll speak very transparently about our family. We have a 33-year-old, I have a 33-year-old son from a prior marriage who lives in Australia, and we want to take care of him, and I actually had to talk with him. His name is Chuck. I said, Chuck, Peter has much greater needs than you. You have a full functioning brain. Well, sometimes I think he does. But we want to do right by him. So what we did is we basically got an insurance policy on my wife, who will probably outlive me, so that when she passes, that'll fund a family protection trust that this gentleman set up for us, so that in case he gets married to somebody that's strange, they can't basically invade the assets that he might mismanage on his own. That's another conversation. But I just given you real life circumstances how you can take care of that, and the insurance cost, because we're very healthy, is really, really very inexpensive, as opposed to allocating millions of dollars to Chuck. This way the life insurance policy will handle it. So these are the creative things that by dialoguing with resources like this up here can help you come up with a tailored solution. So I'd like to entertain questions from the floor, the lady in the back, and then the lady in the front, and we need 5 microphones.
I'll just be brief, but I'm going to respond because I think I'm in the minority. I actually am a sibling, and I think the majority of the audience is actually a parent. When you grow up in a family that has a disabled child, you grow up with the knowledge that the attention given to you as a sibling will probably be not the same. And I would expect that the children that you have would have the expectation that they would not get the same share of the estate when the time comes. It's going to take a lot of conversations, a lot of understanding, but as someone who grew up through it, I had always expected that my brother would get most of the resources, financial, emotional, etc. That's simply the way it is. And you grow up as a unit, and you still love each other. It doesn't really matter.
Let's give her a hand. That's awesome. Thank you for that.
So I have an 11-year-old that has mild cerebral palsy, and I have 2 older siblings. He has 2 older siblings, and we already have a trust set, a living trust. Now, do I need to give him a different trust, the special needs trust, specifically for him? And does the attorney that we've worked with in the past do it, or should I find someone like you? Like, do all attorneys that do trust?
No.
Oh,
No, they do not.
No.
Okay.
So, you know, a living trust is what virtually everybody should do, because it does good things like avoiding the cornerstone of virtually every estate plan is a living trust. That's not our topic today at all. So the question really is not how are your assets going to be managed while you're living, because they would be in your trust, you will control them, you will do as you please. The question is what happens when you're gone, this question we all have to face. So then the question, when you leave assets to your child, how do you leave them to your child? And that's where the special needs trust, so you would have your own trust and you would set up a special needs trust for your son right now. You would name you would name the trustee, that question all of us wrestle with and you may have to wrestle with. So it's a separate entity. Upon your passing, some portion of the estate goes into that trust, and then it has a life of its own. It's going to last as long as your child lives.
Okay. And money, you said 14,000 you put into that trust?
Oh, no. You can leave any amount of money to a special needs trust. It's just that if you give the money to the trust while you're living, you probably have to report it as this isn't a tax seminar, but on a 709, a gift tax return, you use up a tiny bit of your ultimate estate tax protection. It's a minor issue. You can't do the $14,000 annual exclusion, the freebie gift to a special needs trust. But not a big issue, not a problem.
Microphone? Hold on, get the microphone so we can hear your question.
Is the living trust that you have, your lawyer who did it, the same, the one that who could do our special needs trust, or it's a separate lawyer?
Well, that was the point made earlier. You know, I mean, many attorneys do living trusts, and that's what they do. You need someone, and I think there's two of us up here, and there's others. You know, we do revocable trust because you have to do that. I mean, that's how you start out taking care of a family. But by no means does every attorney understand what a special need. Virtually any attorney can get a form. Like I author a form book. You know, so you can get a form and put a special needs trust in place. But the kinds of issues you guys are raising today, you have to have done it. I mean, you have to have been there and counsel people to understand what the issues are. So, you know, there are folks, we're not the only ones around, who have experience and expertise, not just we put up on our website that we do special needs trust. Got to dig a little bit deeper. There's a couple of national organizations. One is called the Special Needs Alliance. You can go to there's 3 organizations at the national level. You know, so there's some due diligence you can do to find attorneys who know what they're doing.
It's the we don't really know if when we started our living trust, the main goal is to set up a special needs trust.
Mm-hmm.
But our lawyer advised us to set up a living trust first. On our living trust,
Sure.
it says a very minimal description of a special needs trust.
So if y'all heard that, I mean, I'll just tell you, I think that's inappropriate.
Yeah.
The special needs trust, for a host of reasons, needs to be a separate trust,
Okay.
a separate freestanding entity. So maybe that attorney doesn't have the experience that you need.
Maybe.
I don't think that attorney has the experience.
There's some questions over here. The one over against the wall? Maybe we'll get a mic to you so we can hear you.
I kind of have a similar situation where, so my child was diagnosed with autism. He's only 4. I don't know what's going to happen, 5, 10 years from now. I don't know how long I'm going to live. So I have other kids, and just like right now, I feel like we should do just a regular trust. He might be fine, but he might not, right? So how do you think about that? Like, and I know you've been talking about, I could die tomorrow, but I can maybe not, right? So.
What age? First.
So I think there's a couple of different ways you can handle it. I think that you could set up a standalone special needs trust and you put contingencies in it that say, if he's high functioning and if he's able to meet certain criteria, then the trustee is permitted to do a couple of things. The trustee could distribute part of the asset, maybe treating this trust as if it were more like a trust for a minor, where you want to keep some protections, maybe allow the trustee to distribute out some money and see how he does. You would build in criteria for the trustee to address. Is he on public benefits? Is he able to support himself? Is he able to get medical insurance outside of Medi-Cal? Those types of things, and other criteria we can build in. Some other attorneys I know will put in what we call kind of a backup special needs trust into a living trust, which is a little bit about what this lady was describing over here, which is kind of, okay, if anybody in this document's going to get an outright distribution and they happen to have special needs, we'll just plunk it into these special needs provisions. I really don't think that's comprehensive enough. It would do in an emergency situation maybe, but I think that the ideal situation is to set up a standalone special needs trust. If you don't need it, there's provisions in there that allow the trustee to distribute the money out.
And I have more questions, but I want to ask Dan to shed some light on, perhaps to that comment, but also a little bit on the wealth management side. It's one thing to develop this 70-plus-year plan if you have children like my age, my son, 21. Some of you have older children, but you still have to have a financial plan. But then there's also the management. So that's great. You need X dollars for a bazillion years, and it's got to work to preserve the the principal, so it can be available for them for many, many years. But how do you work with the wealth management side of that? Because there's going to have to be evaluation of the portfolio. There's going to have to be changes, additions, taxes. How do you actually work with families that way?
Sure, I want to just piggyback
Yeah.
that question first, and then I'll get to it. So another thing you want to do is talking about, you create the trust, you want to fund the trust, for example. And one easy way to fund it is with term life insurance. If something happened, you walked out and you got hit by a bus, and you were the earner or you're the person maybe staying home, someone else is going to have to pick up that situation, and there's going to be a cost to it. So it's a very low cost way to safely guard your assets for income replacement. You can put the special needs trust, and you know what? If you don't need a special needs trust, you can change it, the beneficiary at any time, and you could put your other children, if you want. So with regard to the wealth management thing, so when we put together a plan, you want to look at all of the assets you have. You've got your 401ks, your 403bs, your trusts, your special needs trusts. You want them all working together. So when we put together a plan, you also have to take into account the size of the assets of your estate and then the size of the assets that may be passed down. And if we're going to have to live for 70 years, our risk profile is going to be different for those two types of accounts. We all have relationships with risk. We all have relationships with money, and money is an emotional thing. It's very difficult. I've worked with many people. I've had clients sue their parents because they didn't get the part of inheritance that they wanted. So the collaboration that you do with your family is so important, and that's part of the wealth management process. You want to speak with your advisor, and you want to get all the players in the room to identify all the steps that, on my passing, here are the things that I want to happen, so that they're all on the same page. And then your financial advisor can help you put together an investment allocation to achieve those goals, right? And then once you pass, and it's for your child, then you put together a plan for that. And so the risk profile is going to be a little bit differently for your child as it is for you, so you'll have a more risky portfolio typically. You have more stocks to bonds, essentially.
I want to take one more question. This lady who's been patient, the microphone.
Is there a form or an actuarial table or something that you can try and figure out what your child's financial needs will be, that you can project that?
Yes, there's many tables for that, IRS tables as well that you can use, and that's typically what you'll use in your financial planning.
Okay, thanks.